Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I am Mike Coletta.
And this week, we're going real deep, real obscure on this one. Mike found something that even I hadn't heard of before. A forgotten console known as the NUON.
Yeah, so I figured we did a forgotten game last week, and I kind of want to do a forgotten console this week. And this is VM Labs is the name of the company, and they made the NUON. And to give you a little more background, first, the sources I used today, there's not a lot on Wikipedia about this system really at all, except for listing the games that were for it, because there's only 8. And but the best sources I found were these 2 YouTube videos, and they both have clickbaity titles. So here we go. The most obscure console ever, the NUON, rare, obscure, or retro by Rerez. That's a good video. And then did the Samsung NUON fail? Rare games hardware, full console history. And that's by Top Hat Gaming. So they're 2 good videos if you were interested more in this. That's where I got pretty much all my facts from. But VM Labs, to give you a little background, was founded by Richard Miller in 1995. Now, if that name sounds familiar, that's because Miller was a former vice president of Atari.
Okay, so he's like, I've done this video game thing before. I can do it again.
Exactly. And VM Labs also had 2 other Atari alumni, Jeff Minter, who created the game Tempest, if you recall, and that's going to kind of come up big later, and then John Mathieson. And all 3 of them worked on the Atari Jaguar, which is important to note.
Wow, the pedigree of these folks are just
chef's kiss. You know? Beautiful. So
truly a long history of success.
So Richard Miller believed so much in VM Labs that he sold his house to fund it.
Oh, well, I got to respect that.
Yeah, he was passionate about what he was doing. But early on, they got some help and seed financing from Motorola in exchange for a non-exclusive licensing agreement for a media processor design. And they actually, early on, pre-NUON, had success creating new technologies for like Motorola and Samsung, RCA, and other companies before they had the idea to do the NUON.
Oh, okay. So they'd done some stuff. I mean, I shouldn't say they hadn't done anything before. If they worked at Atari and all that good stuff, they did stuff.
Yeah, they did stuff. And it should be important to know, it was like from 1995 to 1999, they were doing these contracts. And they probably started working on the NUON, if I had to estimate, between like 98 and 99. Like that was around the time they started doing this. But before we get into what the NUON was, we got to go back to another console, specifically a business model of a console. And that was Trip Hawkins and his 3DO. We've talked about this before, but to give you the TLDR, the 3DO business model was to essentially have other companies create the console, and those companies in 3DO's case were Panasonic, Gold Star, which is now LG, and Sanyo. And then Trip Hawkins... Oh, wait, go ahead.
I'm noticing a pattern here with this business model, because this was also the business model that the Apple Pippin used, right?
Oh, yeah.
That was the whole thing, was that other companies would make the consoles, and turns out only one made it. The Steam machines from a couple of years ago, that was their business model as well. They were like, we're going to make software, and then other people can make hardware for it. No one ever did. Those didn't go anywhere, although the Steam Deck, we'll see where that goes. But anyway.
Yeah. Valve is making the Steam Deck, though, aren't they? They're producing
They are. See? Well, there you go. You
Already
got to make
different.
your own thing. Yep.
You got to create your own destiny. But okay, so the fun fact, though, about this business model and why it's dicey is because for Xbox, for Microsoft, for Sony, for PlayStation, they get the profits from the console hardware sales and the software sales. If you are a manufacturer like Panasonic, Gold Star, or Sanyo for the 3DO, you only get profits from the consoles you make. And in order to get those profits, you have to mark up those consoles. So when the 3DO first came out, it was $599 in 1993 money.
Whew, that's probably at least double now in today's money.
Yeah, so it is steep, that's a big reason the 3DO failed. And they ended up doing that, and then they ended up dropping the price. It went down to like $499 and $399. Eventually, at one point, it was down to like $199, and they still couldn't sell the console. So
had no games.
That's the business model that 3DO used. Now, VM Labs slightly altered this. Instead of having them create these NUON consoles from scratch, they were going to use an already existing technology, in this case, DVDs. Okay, because we all know DVDs, DVD players. They were super popular in the early 2000s. I remember being super into collecting them. Like you love a movie, you buy the DVD. That's the thing you did in the early 2000s. I'm sure Tyler, you remember that too. Did you ever buy a DVD because you love a movie so much?
I've bought several DVDs.
Excellent, me too. Now, in 2021, buying a DVD or even a Blu-ray kind of seems ridiculous with streaming, right? But back in the 2000s, that was a great time for DVDs, and so VM Labs wanted to jump on this with their new NUON, which at the time was codenamed Project X.
Oh, sweet project name.
Yeah, and so what they were doing is they were creating a graphics processor for DVD players to enable 3D game functionality and specifically 3D rendering. So the NUON did other stuff than just games. But Project X was announced at E3 in 1998, along with the game for the console, Tempest 3000. Remember I said John Minter?
Oh, yeah.
He made Tempest. So Virtual Light Machine and Iron Soldier 3 were the other two games announced for the NUON, and there was a lot of media hype around the system at the time, which is funny because of how forgotten it eventually became. Like, if you look at 1998 E3, there was a bunch of stuff for the NUON, and they were super ambitious. Like, Richard Miller was quoted as saying he wanted programmers to, quote, do Toy Story in real time so you can interact with it, and have the NUON be the, quote, Dolby of interactivity.
That's
That
what we
was
were
their
promised
goal.
with the PS2. It's Toy Story in real time. You can play Toy Story.
Yeah, see, which now
Which
you
was
probably you
sort of
can
true.
probably play Toy Story now. Yeah,
If you go back and watch Toy Story, it looks a little rough.
yeah, the first one,
Yeah.
for sure. So, VM Labs sold NUON technology to multiple companies. So there's some companies that bought in, and those companies were Motorola. Remember their big non-exclusive licensing person they partnered with, RCA, Samsung, and Toshiba. While RCA, Samsung, and Toshiba all made DVD players that had NUON technology, Motorola actually had just like a set-top box that did it. And there were so many different models of this system that I didn't want to include them here. Okay, there was a lot. If you're interested in them, I suggest you Google them. But they're all variations of these DVD players. They're also just called like DVD, and then there's like a string of letters and numbers. They're not interesting sounding at all. In fact, that's probably a reason why the marketing also failed, but we'll get to that later. But what did NUON technology do? Well, specifically, it added new features to DVDs, and those features had to be on DVDs that were NUON compatible. And those features were smooth forward and reverse functionality, the ability to zoom in and out of sections of like a video. Like you could pause the movie and you're like, what's that in the background? And you could like zoom into it. There was interactive software, like special features found on DVDs and Blu-rays today, but back then it was pretty crazy. And they also had early chapter navigation, which I feel like we all think of as like common practice in DVDs today, but that wasn't around in 2000. So those are the four things it did with movies. But here's the problem. There were only 4 movies that were NUON compatible ever released.
Oh,
and they
no.
all came from 20th Century Fox. And those movies were The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension,
A classic.
Bedazzled, the 2000 remake, Dr. Dolittle 2, and Tim Burton's 2001 Planet of the Apes.
Wow.
Those were the only 4 movies that were NUON compatible. But more important to our needs, NUON technology could play 3D games, as we talked about. And you could plug in a multitude of compatible controllers, and you could play one of the whopping 8 games available.
Woo, boy. Really, really got some good ones here, huh?
Oh, yeah. There's actually not even really 8. There's actually 7, because one of the games is region locked in Korea.
Oh.
So if you owned that Korean NUON player, you could play Crayon Shinchan 3, but no other games for the NUON. That's right. The console was built to play one game. That's how it ended up being in Korea.
That's funny.
Yeah. So the other 7 titles were Tempest 3000, as I mentioned before, Freefall 3050 AD, Merlin Racing, Space Invaders XL, Iron Soldier 3, Ballistic, and the next Tetris. So we're going to go through these games in very quick detail because there are 8 of them, but I'm going to give them their due diligence, and some of them have grime facts, and to be honest, some of them don't because I couldn't find dates and stuff. So here we go. First, we're going to talk about Tempest 3000. This was developed by Jeff Minter and his company Llamasoft. So I think he worked for VM Labs, and like Llamasoft was his company he released Tempest from, essentially. This came out on December 12th, 2000. It is a Nuon exclusive game. You can only play this on a Nuon. It sold 20,000 copies.
That sounds not that bad,
2003.
actually.
Yeah, not bad. And Tempest is described as a tube shooter, I guess. Have you ever played Tempest?
You know, that is one that I have not really played.
So essentially, you're like in a circle and you're traveling through the circle and enemies come up at you. It's like a circular version of Space Invaders, almost, is how I would describe it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but awards, Metacritic, and how long to beat, this doesn't really apply because this game is an arcade game. Like, you can't really beat it, and it was never really reviewed because it was a Nuon exclusive game.
You just play until you lose.
Yeah, the only, I guess, achievement I could say is to people who love Tempest, Tempest 3000 is a good game. You know, like it's known as being a good game, even though it's only on the Nuon. But with that said, people who like it, like they say this is actually the best version before Tempest 4000 was released, which I think was pretty recent, actually, Tempest 4000. I could be completely wrong, though. But why does the Nuon have a version of Tempest? Because Jeff Minter actually worked on Nuon software and built the Nuon's VLM2 audio visualizer. Like, so he built those things. So the same Jeff Minter that made Tempest 2000 and the Atari Jaguar made Tempest 3000. So that's why we have this game. And I would argue it's the only good game on the system.
Dang.
So, yeah.
And Tempest 4000 is recent. It came out just a couple years ago on PlayStation 4, Xbox
Thank you
One.
for looking that up. Yeah. So if you want to know what Tempest 3000 is like, probably just play Tempest 4000. That would be my, because you don't want to buy a new one. Okay. No one does unless you're an obscure video game collector. Okay. So Freefall 3050 AD. This was developed by Total Arcade Software, and the C in arcade is actually a K, if you want to know. This was released on the Nuon on December 12, 2000, and in Windows on January 24th, 2019.
Okay. 20 years later.
Here it comes, yeah. Number of copies sold is less than 10,000 units for the Nuon. It is an action game. And the awards or accolades are groundbreaking achievement. It was a well-reviewed game, actually. It got an 80 out of 100 from the one site I saw, so maybe it's not bad. But there's a big problem with this game, and we're going to talk about it in a second. The plot is the world is now full of skyscrapers because a virus is on the surface of the earth. And naturally, there is crime. Okay. So how do you fight crime? With the power of the skydiving police.
Oh, of course. Obviously.
That's how, yeah. So the whole game is you, as a police officer, skydiving and, like, shooting things while you're skydiving. That's the game. But the reason this game is important to the Nuon is we got to talk about the console, because the Nuon came with a stock controller, but there were actually 4 controllers available. All of them had different button layouts.
Love it.
Yeah, like if this couldn't be any worse. There's 4 different controllers, all with different button layouts. Some of them have analog sticks and some of them didn't. And for Freefall 350 AD, you needed an analog stick. Specifically, the best controller I heard is the Stealth controller, which is a ripoff of an N64 controller. That's the controller you need on the Nuon to play Freefall 3050 AD. So before I said this might be a good game, but the fact that you have to have a controller, a specific controller to play it, I would say makes it so it just isn't very good.
A specific controller on an obscure console. That's
yeah.
tough.
I didn't even eBay how much a Nuon Stealth controller would cost. Do you want to do that right now, Tyler?
Yeah.
You can find it on eBay. I don't even know if you could, but hopefully. So while that's happening, the next game is Merlin Racing. This was developed by Miracle Design. It was on December 2000. No idea how many copies were sold. The only thing I know about it is it's a racing game. That's the big thing I know about it. This is a Diddy Kong Racing / Mario Kart clone, and the one standout feature is it does have a plot.
All right. Diddy Kong Racing had a plot.
Yeah, so this I mean, that's why it looks like Mario Kart and plays like Mario Kart, but in the way of Diddy Kong Racing, it has a plot. That's kind of how they're cloned together. And that plot is that Merlin has been captured, and it's up to a magical group of racing animals to save him by collecting keys. And the game is bad, is what I wrote. The races are unfair. Like, you can't win even if you're good at the game. Like, the first place computer opponent is always faster than you.
Wow.
It's designed that way. And when you do win a game, it feels like luck, is how it was described in those
like
videos.
it just flips a coin at the start of the race. So like, well, are we going to let him win this time or not?
Yeah, so it's almost like they took the Mario Kart mechanics and it escalated them. You know, when we say a game is Mario Karting, as in it's like going to always find a way to catch up to you or make a game close, it's like they just turn the dial all the way to computer has advantage in this. So yeah, it's pretty rough. Space Invaders XL, I'm not going to go into detail on because it's Space Invaders. It's just a more colorful version of Space Invaders. Did you find a stealth controller?
I did, yeah. So for a brand new in-box sealed stealth controller, HPI NUON stealth controller, how much do you think it costs for one of these?
In-box sealed? I'm going to say $100.
$100? It is 450 Great British pounds, which works out to about 618 US dollars.
Wow,
Before shipping. It's about $100 to ship it. It ships from the United Kingdom, so that okay. That's how much it is for new sealed one. For one that is the Logitech one, this one isn't a stealth one, but it is a NUON controller. That one is $200. But you're right. This looks straight up like an N64 ripoff. The stealth controller. It is very expensive. Yeah, but it's new sealed in box. It doesn't seem like they have any for sale that are like loose or out of the box, you know? Like if you wanted to just play the game and not collect something. But it seems like it's pretty expensive.
I feel like that could be a controller though you find at a used game store, and the people there don't even know what it is, and they honestly think it's just an off-brand N64 controller. Yep. And then you realize you have solid gold in your hands.
Yeah.
You
know,
know,
if I saw that, that's
gold.
exactly what I would think it was. I would be like, oh, that's a weird off-brand. Like this is the N64 controller you give to your little brother. You know?
It looks like Mad Catz, straight up.
Yep.
Straight up
but
Mad Catz.
$600.
Should we do an episode on Mad Catz? That sounds really cool. I love Mad Catz. I also love that it was a Z at the end of it. You know, that's what's important. That's how you know it's really cool and edgy in 90s. All right. So the next game on our list is actually a cool game in theory, but it just doesn't play off very well, apparently. It's not executed well. It's Iron Soldier 3, and this was developed by Eclipse Software Design. It came out on the NUON. It had separate North American and European releases. So on June 20th, 2000, it came out in North America, and then on October 2000, it came out in Europe. This was a game that was on the NUON, but also on the PlayStation. And if you were going to play this game, you should play the PlayStation version because it's really hard to find the NUON version. The number of copies sold is unknown. It is a first-person shooter, but you're a mech, so it's a mech simulator, and it's kind of an open world game. So it's doing a lot of stuff here, or trying to do a lot of stuff here. The average time to complete, this was the only one I could find with a how to beat article, and it was 6.5 hours. The game ranking score gave it a percentage of 61%. And this game is actually looks pretty cool. It's a mech game. You remember when those were a thing? I kind of miss mech games.
Oh, I played a lot of MechWarrior 2 when I was too young to know how to play it. I just would load it up and try to figure it out.
I feel like mechs is something, and MechWarrior in general, that's not really in pop culture anymore, even though it should be. It's really cool. The idea of being in a giant robot, ever since the Power Ranger days, you loved that as a kid. But don't worry, everyone. I've already put mechs on the list. So it's on the list. Great. Just know that. This title was not exclusive to the NUON, as it was also on PlayStation, and I would play the PlayStation version if you could. It is a FPS in a mech where you're giving freedom to roam around, which seems pretty cool. But the problem with Iron Soldier 3 specifically versus other Iron Soldier titles is the gameplay is super repetitive, apparently. And there's kind of a lack of depth. You know how a mech game to me was kind of almost like a flight simulator? Like you're learning how to drive this giant robot. It does not have that at all in this. It's and I feel like that's the cool, was it the MechWarrior 1 or MechWarrior 2 for original Xbox that you could get the cockpit controller?
Yeah, the Mech Assault games.
PAX. Yeah, they have it at PAX every year in Seattle. You can they have a retro gaming room, and they have that MechWarrior, and they'll set you up to play in a giant
with the controller, the big huge. Yeah, you're talking about Steel Battalion.
Oh, really? I thought it was a MechWarrior game. Maybe I'm wrong.
No. There were two Mech Assault games, which were sort of arcade versions of a MechWarrior game. They didn't have as much sort of the sim stuff that you're talking about. They were more about just blasting people. And then there was Steel Battalion, which had the whole controller, and that was a separate game.
Yeah, okay. Then I played that one with like 10 other people at PAX. It's there every year.
Awesome.
They have someone that like lets people use it. It's like a private collector owns it, and then they're like at PAX we let people play it. And they have like 2 people there to teach you how to play. It's that
That's
complex.
so cool. That's like the only way I bet that anybody plays that game, like multiplayer. Like you set up like 10 of those in a big huge area that's set aside for it, and then play some multiplayer Steel Battalion. That sounds really fun.
Cool. It's really cool. I had a really good time with my friends, and I actually got yelled at because I was pushing too many buttons. Like I was like, they're like, everyone pick this mech, and I was like, picked another mech, and they're like, oh great, you picked the wrong one, and they got like kind of annoyed with me, and I'm like, can you just let me fool around in this game? You know, it's just a silly thing.
It's a video game.
It's a video game. We're all playing around here, and it's a game that I will never probably play again after getting this experience. But it was fun. Like beating your friends and stuff, and fighting in giant robots. It was just ridiculous, and I kind of wish that stuff. Like I was thinking that would be a perfect Dave and Buster's game.
Oh yeah, for sure.
To have like 8 mech cockpits next to each other and you're all just like fighting in mechs. Like that sounds awesome, you know, as like a really cool experience. And the kind of experience you want in an arcade versus at home, you know? So, but yeah, Iron Soldier 3, if you like mech games, maybe give it a shot. But if you're not, it's definitely skippable. Regardless, for the NUON, once again, didn't do very well. Okay. The next game is called Ballistic. This was developed by the Mitchell Corporation. It was released on the arcade in, I would say, winter 1998, early 1999. PlayStation, it came out in like October of 1999 in North America, and then March and October 2000 in Japan and Europe, respectively. It came out on Game Boy Color as well. It's a puzzle game, so it could handle that on Game Boy Color. That was 99, 2000. And it came out on the NUON, specific to our reasons here, on July 2000. Okay? Number of copies sold, completely unknown. But it was a very successful arcade game. A Game Machine listed it Puzzloop, which was what its arcade version was called Puzzloop, and it was called Ballistic on NUON, on their March 1st, 1999 issue as being the 8th most successful arcade game of the year in 1999. So, hey, good for them. It's a puzzle game through and through, and here's how the gameplay works. Essentially, different colored marbles are rolled down a spiral path towards a goal that your job as the player is to defend the goal by shooting marbles out of a cannon at those marbles coming down in a spiral. You want to match the color so they disappear. There are also bonus items attached to the marbles that can, for example, like slow down how fast the marbles go down the spiral, or they can cause like marbles of all the same color to disappear. So it's got this like weird, like it's like Bust a Move, but it's got this like aspect of defending a goal to it.
Sounds like Zuma.
Oh yeah, I had never played Zuma.
Yeah, PopCap game Zuma. It's good. It's really fun.
So yeah, it's essentially the game ends when you exceed the goal limit, you know, the threshold of the goal, and then you get the high score, like how you did. You know, eventually the game's going to end. It's one of those kind of games, you know?
Yeah, it just gets harder and harder until you suck.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. But yeah, it was not a bad title, and it got success on the arcade. But once again, for the NUON, just not very popular. Also, I'm pretty sure for the NUON, it was only available on... Yeah, it's only available on Samsung DVD NUONs.
Okay, so not only is it like locked to this console, this obscure console, it's locked to a specific version of this obscure console.
Exactly. And the next game, which is called The Next Tetris, is locked only to Toshiba.
Okay.
NUONs, which is funny. So the next Tetris, it's Tetris. Like, I don't know what to tell you. The interesting thing about it is it was developed by Hasbro Interactive and Crave Entertainment, so it has Hasbro behind it. It came out on the NUON in 2001 and was also released on the PlayStation and PC in 1999 and the Dreamcast in the year 2000. And the genre is Tetris. Not much to say about it. The big thing is, like I said before, it was only available on Toshiba NUONs, so not a lot of people played this game.
All right.
The last one that I want to talk about today is that Korean exclusive game, which is the Crayon Shin-Chan 3, also known as Jangu the Unhelpable 3, is how I saw it.
The Unhelpable. Oh, that sounds...
Yeah, right? Developed by, who knows? No one knows. I couldn't find it. I went on a lot of obscure wikis and I could not find it. It came out on the NUON in 2000 in Korea only. I know it's a side-scrolling platformer. I know that for sure. But apparently Crayon Shin-Chan is a very popular anime and manga series in Korea, and that's why they made a game out of it for Korean audiences only. Unfortunately, that's the only thing I know about it. That, and since the game is region locked, it is one game that can be played on one specific model of NUON the Samsung DVD N591. It's the only one you can play it on. But yeah, so those are the 8 games available. So let's go through why this console failed or became forgotten. And there's a multitude of reasons. A lot of you probably can guess why, but I'm going to go down the list right now. Here's some we briefly touched on. There are only 4 movies compatible with Nuon tech. There are only 8 games that came out for the whole system, and some of those games are region locked or locked by manufacturer. There were multiple controllers based on different models of Nuon, and some games pretty much required certain controllers to play or make them playable. Like you could play that freefall game on the stock controller that came with it, but unless you had an analog stick, you're going to have a bad time. The one reason I haven't mentioned in this list of explaining the Nuon and what it did is marketing. There was not a very good marketing campaign associated with it, and that is because VM Labs was very bad at marketing this because the Nuon was mostly marketed as a DVD player.
Okay.
Gaming publications were mostly like partially or completely out of the loop when the Nuon was launched. Even though there was all that E3 hype about what VM Labs was doing, they didn't tell them what happened, which is also why you don't see a lot of reviews for these Nuon games. The Nuon was mostly advertised along other DVD players, not even mentioning that it played games. It just said it had Nuon capability. But what does that mean? If you're like a consumer,
people see that and they just go, "What? I don't care. I want to watch movies on it."
Exactly. So they had no clue. Like I saw a lot of Best Buy like advertisements that were scanned in when reading that was like Nuon technology, and that's it. It just expects you to know what that is. And I'm sure there were a lot of confused Best Buy employees explaining this as well, or trying to explain this. So
and it's got Nuon technology. You really want that?
Yeah, exactly. And everyone's like, what does that even mean? You could play Bedazzled.
It's technology.
Do you want to watch Bedazzled and see some special features of your favorite movie, Bedazzled?
Probably you can fast forward smoothly through it. Like, like the tape?
Yeah, like a tape. Cool, neat. I'll just get my VCR. So, regardless, I think VM Labs and the manufacturers really dropped the ball, both in communicating with each other about what was going on. But for me, the big thing that would really get me, I think, if I owned this system, is the controller thing. Like that's inexcusable. Like really, there's a very real chance that you bought a Nuon and Freefall 350 AD, and you either bought it thinking you were going to play it, or in a worse situation, I think a parent bought it thinking their kid was going to play it, and it was just straight up impossible because you couldn't steer unless you had an analog stick. Because you could steer, but it's like you didn't have the sensitivity you needed to make those like quick dodges and stuff. So that's it. That's the Nuon. Probably best that it died, because otherwise we would have had poor children wanting an Xbox or a PS2 for Christmas, and they would get a DVD player, and that would be a hot bummer. So what happened to VM Labs, though? Let's go through that real quick. Well, right along around September 11th, 2001, VM Labs actually lost most of their funding, and they were sold to Genesis Microchip after they had sat in Chapter 11 bankruptcy for a little bit. Believe it or not, Genesis Microchip did use the Nuon and Faruja technologies that VM Labs made for the DVD market, and they ended up using Nuon technology in HD TV chipsets. So they did end up using it. Now, after that, the technology was pretty old, and it just got aged out, really quickly.
Yeah,
but they moved on, but it did get reused again. So it did, like, if you had an HD TV in the early 2000s, you might have had Nuon technology built into it, and you had no idea, which is kind of neat. But yeah, that's pretty much the Nuon. Very forgotten. The fact that you told me you didn't know what it was, I was like, wow,
that's crazy.
I've stumped Tyler.
It's all about the marketing. It seems like what it comes down to, especially for these consoles that are the ideas that other companies will make their own versions of it, because it's hard to have like a coherent marketing campaign when Panasonic is making one and Samsung is making one. And I think they're trying to sort of replicate how DVDs and VCRs worked at the time and Blu-ray players today. Which is so that's like an interesting thing. Like, why can't games work the same way that movies do, in that sense, where you just buy an Xbox player made by whoever makes Xbox players and play your Xbox games on it? I wonder why that doesn't ever seem to work. Like, why DVD and Blu-ray don't really need a marketing campaign, whereas games do, or a game system does. Like, I'm trying to figure out what the difference is there. I have to think about that for a while because it seems obvious that, well, if you don't have a coherent marketing campaign, your console's going to fail. But then Blu-ray players, DVD players, VCRs, they all did fine. And they don't have a coherent, like, there's nobody out here, like, advertising VHS technology in the 80s, right? It was all just, you want to watch the movie, you buy the player for it, right?
Yeah, and I think the big thing now too is it goes one way, not the other direction. You can't have a DVD player that is marketed for DVDs that plays games, but you can have a game console that's marketed for games that plays DVDs.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is, I think, because I got my Xbox One. I've used the Blu-ray player twice, maybe. Like, it's one of those things too that this tech, even if it got really big and moved on, I don't think it would have survived even if it had a good launch, because DVDs were like a 2001 to a 2010 thing. When did Netflix start streaming? That was what?
2009.
2010. Yeah. So that streaming would have killed this regardless.
For sure.
Unless they adapted. But I agree with it. I think the big thing of why it doesn't work is that markup thing. Like, you can't be a company that just makes the hardware for other games. Yeah. Unless you also make software, because you're going to have to, like, or unless you agree to take a percentage of all of the game sales, which is what, like, Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft do, But
that still, like, makes me wonder about, like, so, like, Samsung doesn't make movies, I don't think, right? Or maybe they do through some, like,
but
weird
those
agreement.
Companies are so big, they make so many other things too, right? Like, Samsung makes TVs, they make
DVD but they're not
players.
Just going to make DVD players to lose money on making DVD players, right? They got to be making a profit on the hardware there. So, like, why can't that model be applied to games? And I'm obviously it can't, because it has never worked before. But I'm, like, having trouble articulating why.
When we make the Jaybird 3000 console, we could probably make it work.
Yeah, we could probably make it work. We'll have lots of different manufacturers making Jaybird 3000.
We'll be like, hey, Tyler and I have read the history, and we know what doesn't work. So we're going to try this thing that has never worked and see if it goes. Anyway, though, that's the NUON. I'm glad that my weird YouTube algorithm showed me this. And I got into it. It was exciting. But yeah, it's pretty great. I've been watching a lot of weird gaming history stuff, and just out of nowhere, like, oh, this will give me ideas. And this one popped up, and I was like, what is this now? And I had to do it. So, but Tyler, what have you been playing over the course of this week? What you been doing?
This week, I finished Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart last week.
Nice.
And so then I fired up my Final Fantasy 14 subscription again, and now I'm back. I'm deep into it, going through the story that has come out since Shadowbringers, so that I can be ready for Endwalker in the fall, or November-ish, I guess. And it's been a lot of fun. I just love that game. It's like comfort food for me, so I can always come back to it and play it. So that's what I've been playing there. I did pick up Skyward Sword HD on the old Switch, so I'll probably give that a roll at some point too. But mostly my free gaming time is Final Fantasy 14 right now. So that's
nice.
That's me.
I watched our friend play some Final Fantasy 14, and I watched him do a boss battle raid activity thing.
Yeah.
And the music is awesome.
Oh my gosh, it has the best music of any MMO,
just
for sure.
Dumps all over WoW in music. It was like this metal, weird, like fantasy metal kind of song, and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, I was so into it. And
do you know what boss he was doing?
No, not off the top of my head. I have no idea. But it was just really cool, and like, it was very colorful and like just really hard fantasy vibes. Real high fantasy stuff that was like great.
Yeah, it's really good. I like WoW's art style of like how clean it is and how sort of easy it is to read a lot of things. And Final Fantasy is not quite that clean, and it looks like just so much stuff is happening, but it looks cooler because of that too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I like it. I'm apprehensive to get into another MMO just based on how I feel about like WoW, and how I didn't really dig the grind that much. But it is free. It's free to jump in, so maybe I'm like, if it's free, I can just give it a try and see how I feel.
It's much more about the story. Like, you play it as if it's a single player game that sometimes you need to group up with people to do stuff, and you'll have a lot more fun, I think. But it is definitely a long slog, and there's a lot of story stuff that's in there that's definitely just filler because they needed content. They wanted to pad the length, it seems. It's good. There's a good story there, but like moment to moment, it's not always super fun. So,
yeah. Well, this week I also bought Skyward Sword HD. I just caved and bought it, and I did start playing it, and I'm having a good time. I'm not really that far into it, maybe like 30, 45 minutes in, just based on how my time has been this week. But I'm digging it, and I'm enjoying it. I also downloaded that Pokemon Unite MOBA.
Oh, I need to check that out too.
And I haven't checked it out, but I've been watching some videos on it. It looks very different, but it still is. It's definitely a MOBA. You know, you could tell by like watching the videos. It's very League of Legends, Dota-y. You know, It's got the same things going on there. But so I'll look forward to playing more Skyward Sword this week. But that's probably all I've been playing. But we got an email to read, and it's a long one.
Okay,
it's a long email, but we're gonna do it because we believe in it. And we're good. So a while back, Tyler, you and I talked about streaming in video games and if it's going to ever take off. And I think we had some thoughts on that. Thoughts that, frankly, I don't remember at all because this was 3 weeks ago. So, but we got an email from Tim. Just Tim. I hope he's okay with me using his first name. And it is, it says, first time, long time, smiley face is the subject line. And it goes a little something like this. Hey, guys. Been a huge fan of the pod since nearly the beginning. You guys have produced something really special here, and I want to say thank you. Well, thank you. That's very nice to say.
That. It's nice.
Please forgive the way too long email here. Wanted to give a lighthearted alternative take on a topic that comes up frequently. As someone who has 1,000 hours in cloud gaming under my belt so far,
wow, that is a lot.
Yeah,
okay,
I want to play.
This guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I thought this was a good email to read. I'm like, we should read this email. I want to play devil's advocate a bit on the game streaming conversation, offering and hoping for a more positive future in terms of consumer protection and ownership with the rise of cloud-based gaming. This may be a bit against the grain of the vast majority of gamers, in parentheses, it seems, who are largely skeptical of cloud gaming. Some of what I think here is also probably naive, too optimistic for what we can expect from gaming companies, but I like envisioning a futurist-style goal of what this could or must do for gaming in a positive way, so long as we are critical and demand the gaming future we like as consumers. First and foremost, I think a reorientation of the questions we ask and answer are required here. The smartphone market is absolutely massive globally, and there's very little stopping AAA games from being played on mobile devices through game streaming in the coming years. The upside for Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Sony, and all game publishers is simply far too large for game streaming to slow down here, with third-party devices becoming a major place where AAA games are played very soon. My initial point being, we can't stop this incoming flux of gamers. Given this, how do we look forward and define a positive future and have a positive conversation about it? This is already causing the beginnings of a deep paradigm shift in how we think about games. Even if it takes more years to really take over as mainstream, with all inevitable technological developments that force a perspective and paradigm shift on us, I feel we must start asking and answering the questions like, what do we want this inevitable future to look like? And how do we put the protections in place now that we see it as necessary? For the huge percentage of future gamers that will be cloud-first gamers, this is opposed to fighting or refusing and accept the paradigm shift on principle or preference, even if you and I aren't cloud gamers. Many of our fellow gamers will be. I'm going to stop right there because I actually agree with this, and I didn't even think about the fact that everyone has a cell phone.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
And so if that's the argument here, then yeah, I totally see that. The only problem, I think, is old men, people like Tyler and I, who want our games to be, we want to own our games, you know? And that's the hard part. But with this future shift, maybe it'll shift over, and I love it. I love Game Pass. I'm a big fan of Game Pass, and everyone knows that.
The world doesn't care about what old men want either. You know what I mean? Like, maybe we're not going to be in love with this, but like people who haven't even been born yet are not going to have the same ideas around ownership of video games that we do, and they're not going to care. Right. And like you said, like Game Pass already, I'm starting to give up a little bit on that, like this ownership idea, because Game Pass is so convenient, you know?
Definitely. And I think if you have Game Pass, pretty soon it's going to come with that xCloud thing, I think, or something like that.
It does. Right? It already does.
Oh, it does? I thought that was in beta. I didn't know if you had access to it yet. But I also have no way to play that, so I don't have the little backbone thing for my phone yet. So anyway, okay. Continue with the email. I say this and am compelled to send this message to you guys because I'm worried that people are largely ignoring the opportunity to protect gamers here with respect to game streaming and instead simply criticizing it, albeit for good reasons, but not willing to accept it and thus unable to shape it. I'm worried we will have a game streaming driven future without our wholehearted examination and have an even poorer gaming ecosystem that is dominated by the negative aspects as the system we have today. Not good news for our first steps towards a Ready Player One Oasis. Haha. I do think it would be really cool if we had a Ready Player One style Oasis. Tyler, do you agree?
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd much rather demand things like a new system of consumer ownership as a part of this new paradigm and ecosystem. See, so he even jumps on you.
This is a really, really interesting way to look at it, because you're totally right. If we just sit here and say, nah, it'll never happen, it'll never work, and then it inevitably does, then we're going to be looking at it going, well, now it doesn't do the things I want it to do, and I'm stuck using it because it's the only way to play games, or because it's the most convenient way to play games. And it's like, well, if people like us, old people like us who didn't want it, in the past, like if we had just accepted it earlier, we could have been let into the conversation and been able to sort of dictate what we want to see out of this rather than just rejecting it wholesale. Now we have no say in what it becomes, right?
Yeah, totally. So Tim goes on to say, the current system of gaming we have is far from perfect. We can take what's currently wrong with the video game market and take lessons from the streaming/TV movie market and help demand the shape a system that supports all of our goals as gamers before the next billion gamers come online. I'm thinking of topics like transferable game license purchases, regardless of platform. The reason I like the GeForce Now approach, and to the lesser extent but still intriguing the Stadia approach of non-subscription based game purchases. Subscription-only models remove game licenses from the question beyond my degree of comfort, which is why I don't like the xCloud and Amazon approaches as such personally. Historical preservation standards built into platforms from the beginning of game development and or a system of archival and preservation. I do think that would be important. Like if you could say, hey, we're going to give you a subscription to this game service, right? But instead of us being like, this games that we're going to have to take on and off of here because that's just the way it works. Like you can't keep adding games. We're going to run out of space. So maybe you could favorite a game, you know, you don't want this to go away. And it would give you a certain number of favorites a month. This is my idea. This is not in the email. So if this is a stupid idea, it's not Tim's fault. It's all me, is what I'm going to say. But like, I think that would be a way to fix that, you know, because they do, like Game Pass, they have to take games off of there because you can't just keep adding, you know, save space.
Well, it's all about, it's more about the negotiation of the licenses too between publishers and the service as well. Like I have a feeling the Microsoft games are never going to leave Game Pass because they have a vested interest in keeping their own games on their service, but not everybody does, or not every publisher does. And from like a preservation perspective too, is like game companies have historically not cared about preservation. They've only cared about it in as much as it allows them to like resell a game. It's like, oh, like when Capcom sells you Street Fighter 2 for the 100th time, their goal is not to preserve Street Fighter 2. The goal is to sell you another copy of Street Fighter 2, right? So in a world where games are not or like exist elsewhere and are just streamed into you, like there's no way to preserve that in the future, right? With it through emulation or whatever. That like there's no way for the community to preserve those games.
Yeah, definitely. It's gonna be. I mean, it's exciting. It makes me excited to see what the future is gonna hold for all this because we are on the shift. It's gonna change. You know, in the next 10 years, I could see people just playing Halo on their phones on the bus all the time. You know what I mean? Maybe that's good though, because then we won't have those terrible mobile games anymore.
Yeah,
they'll just get like pushed out by like good games, which would be
maybe
cool. The last thing on the list of topics that Tim lists is save compatibility across platforms. Beyond cross progression, increased portability between platforms, which I think is cool. Like, yeah, I think having it so you could essentially play a game off isn't Fortnite's really good about that right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Fortnite's really crushing it with that. So the email goes on to say, because we are about to have these billion mobile devices come online as AAA game machines through streaming in the next few years, how do we define this future positively? What would we want as a consumer of game streaming? Because we, whether like it or not, simply can't say no to the rise. Like it's inevitable, like you said before, Tyler. I love video game history almost as much as I love playing games. I think not anticipating paradigm shifts has and will cause more lost games and fewer gamer and consumer protections in the new paradigm. We will soon have even larger shared platforms, and I think we should demand the game streaming future that makes sense to all of us to protect us as customers. To answer the question, what happens to my games if they're removed from a game streaming platform? The same thing that happens to your movie collection when Netflix removes a movie. The unsatisfying answer is, in my opinion, this simply won't be a question that occurs to the next generation of gamers, save for quite a small minority. Digital licenses on PC and always online consoles are significantly closer to game streaming from an ownership perspective that the foregone eras of pure AAA local gaming. This is not to be cheeky, but to say, even if we don't like it, game streaming is coming in a very big way and has already started changing how we interact with games. Thinking of especially Control and Hitman 3 on Switch, for example. It's like every major AAA game is becoming a server-dependent game, regardless of local hardware, which is something we've been well used to for a long time, but previously limited to select games. This, quote, practical questions of the technology here are largely temporary. The prime example that comes to mind in this fact is the fact that internet speeds may not be good enough today everywhere in the United States to achieve game streaming consistently for everyone. This is 100% my problem right now. This is Mike talking. I can't do it. My internet's too bad to do game streaming. This is a temporary problem that will slowly disappear as a barrier in the coming years. For many people, this is already not a concern today, and game streaming works nearly flawlessly. The input lag is nearly gone with the proper Stadia setup, and this lag will be a problem solved on other platforms in the coming years. Tyler, have you tried xCloud yet, or or Stadia or anything?
I have, yeah. I have found, in my experience, the input lag to be noticeable. Not always problematic, though. If you're like specifically for playing something like Destiny on mouse and keyboard, unplayable. Like it needs to be exact. If you're playing with the controller, though, you might not notice, especially if you're used to playing on an HD TV that sort of has some input lag already built into it. You might not notice it, and you might actually have a decent experience. But for mouse and keyboard, in my experience, it's like, no, can't do it.
I've also heard about the genre of game matters. Like on a single player JRPG, you're not going to notice or care.
Yep. You would be fine. You playing a Civilization style game, totally doable.
Yeah, it's really like if you're like a really sweaty FPS player, sorry, maybe streaming is not for you yet, But
yeah. But that is that. But Tim's right here. Like, yeah, like it's yet is really really is inevitable, I think.
All right, so this goes on. We're almost done. The reduction in cost, a nearly non-existent barrier to entry to play. For example, Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield on any device will have many more gamers playing these major AAA titles than ever before by a large margin, which is really freaking cool when you think about it. Game demos are largely already streamed to games journalists through Parsec. People are already largely used to streamed games from local hardware to their other devices. We are very close to that simply being a data center instead of a local console or PC. The majority of gamers, in my opinion, will soon be complaining about game stream quality instead of hard drive and download management. Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about how great it's going to be to not have to worry about hard drive space on my Xbox. Because it drives me nuts. It's always full.
Yeah, and the amount of time it takes to download games too. Like that won't even be. That's like not even something you have to consider because it's just video streaming. You don't even think about downloading the movie when you click on watching a movie on Netflix. It just starts.
You could just play it day one. That'd be so sick. All right. I'm always in it for the futurist argument here. Let's acknowledge the inevitable trends so we can shape and build the future we actually want that addresses some of our fundamental concerns around ownership and consumer protection in brand new ways. The birth of the game streaming industry is a great opportunity to demand and redemand standards around the game preservation and transferable game ownership that are existing problems today. Game streaming is coming, even if proper local hardware setups are here to stay forever as well. I want to make sure at least to consider a good faith analysis of what's coming and how we can improve our condition as consumers in gaming and hopefully not land in some consumer protectionless void driven solely by large companies. We can improve the condition we see today in gaming instead of being saddened by the shifting times and miss the opportunity to demand the system we'd like to see with consumer protection and preservation considerations from major game companies and publishers. Woo! Sorry again for the absurd length here. Had to send it. Keep it up, guys. You are my favorite podcast out there and are doing something awesome. Thank you, Tim. And yeah, I totally agree. You're right. Like, instead of being like, we don't want streaming, what about this? We should be focusing on making it so companies know what we want so they don't try to screw us over, essentially.
So the questions that I have then for that world is like, well, how do we make it known? Because right now, as an individual, the only lever that I have to pull to show whether or not I like a game streaming thing is either use it or not use it, right? And that doesn't really give detailed, nuanced feedback to Microsoft about what I want my consumer protections to be. They just know I didn't use it, or Stadia. They just know I don't use it or that I do use it. So that's the question I have. The other thing is, to play devil's advocate. How do you to continue,
a double devil's advocate?
A double devil's advocate. You are making the assumption here, like the only reason to not do this to not accept it and then do what you're saying is like try to have your voice heard and craft the system that you want to see is that's if you make the assumption that this is a foregone conclusion, that like this is the future. That is an assumption that may not be true. Like maybe it will not happen, and so maybe some people think that. I tend to agree that this seems to be the way so many companies are pushing it. It's inevitable that at some point somebody's going to do it at the right place at the right time and get it right. And then everybody else will get it right too. And then that will be the world we live in. But you could make the argument that like, I think that will never happen for reasons. And I guess you could make that argument, but I don't think you're right.
I think in a perfect world too, this would drive like infrastructural change as far as internet access goes to people.
Yeah. Well, like Starlink.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that like, well, I live in rural Kansas and I will not be able to ever play anything with a decent latency. And it's like, well, maybe something like Starlink, which I don't know if it's there yet, if it has the latency issue solved. But like things like that are just eventually going to solve that problem. I think we're right here.
Definitely. Man, now I feel like I need to get better internet, Really pay for it. Thank you for the email, though, Tim. It was a very long one. We're just doing one today because this was a long email. But I wanted to do it because it's important and it feels exciting. And I kind of wish I remember what I said like 4 weeks ago. We talked about this, but that's fine. But I think Tim makes a great argument. And if you want to send us an email, you can send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can join our Discord group. Either I'll send you a link in an email, or you can go to my Twitter @mecoletta and click on the pinned invite at the very top of my page. Tyler's on Twitter too, @SneakerElf. If you want to argue with him about stuff, just kidding. You don't have to.
But I'd be happy to.
He'd be happy to argue, but it would be more like a friendship debate, right?
Yeah.
That's what it would be. But other than that, we'll be back next week. Thank you so much for listening. And Tyler, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye, everybody.